Chapter 15 of Pawns in the Game by William Guy Carr. The Revolutionary Reign of Terror. Study of the methods employed by the Illuminati's agents in Spain is of great value to those who would protect their country from the danger of similar tribulations. Revolutionary leaders have cells occupy key positions in jails, prisons, and asylums. Their purpose is to control these institutions so they can release the anti-social elements under detention and use them as shock troops during the revolts. In every revolution to date, the anti-social prisoners and the criminally insane have been used to arouse the bloodlust in the mob and thus introduce the reign of terror, which the revolutionary leaders calculates will cause the general public to surrender in the quickest possible time. The prison policy in Madrid was influenced greatly by the advice given the authorities in the Popular Front government by General Kleber, the Canadian-Russian who, after taking the theoretical training in the Lenin Institute in Moscow, was sent to Spain to serve Stalin and obtain practical experience in the revolutionary warfare. As soon as the Popular Front government took office in March 1936, the extreme leftist members insisted that an amnesty bill be passed granting liberty to all those who had taken part in the Austrian rebellion. In addition to this, 318 small army revolutionaries, 30,000 others who had been arrested as communists were given their liberty. After July 17th, another 40,000 common criminals were released on condition they would bear arms in the Loyalist army. Revolutionary leaders liquidate most of the common criminals after they have served their purpose. By doing so, they convince a great many people that the atrocities committed during the revolution were the crimes of irresponsible acting on their own initiative, and not in accordance with a preconceived plan of terrorism. These were the conditions existing when General Franco decided he would try to save Spain from communist tyranny. Many books have been written telling how Franco and a mere handful of Spanish generals finally managed to defeat the communist plot. It is an exciting story of courage, of fortitude, and great faith in their Christian crusade. As soon as Franco issued his proclamation, the Red Undersecretaries for Army, Navy, and Air ordered the communist cells to liquidate all officers listed as enemies. This task was carried out with great thoroughness. Communist cells had been placed in mechanical communications and signal branches of the services. This proved the organizers were sticking to the pattern laid down from the English, French, Russian, and German revolts. Taken by surprise, nearly two-thirds of the officers were murdered cold-bloodedly during the initial stages of the attack. These mutineers tried to convince other ranks and ratings that they were carrying out the government's orders and executing officers who had been convicted enemies of the Popular Front government. Many men would not believe that they were told. Before long, it was not uncommon for one warship to be seen firing at a range of only a few yards into another. In one case, the fore turrets was named by Reds, and the after turret of the same ship named by anti-Reds. The massacres which started aboard the ships spread into the dockyards and the cities in which they were located. There might have been some excuse for the drastic action taken against the officers who could be expected to take sides with Franco, but it is impossible to excuse the terrorism which the communists, acting as soldiers and police of the Popular Front government, inflicted upon the unarmed and unsuspecting populace. The imposition of terrorism proved at the cost of hundreds of thousands of innocent lives that Lenin's policy had been accepted. He ruled that the terrorism had to accompany every violent effort to overthrow a government because terrorism was the most economic method of subjugating the masses quickly and thoroughly. It must be remembered that the leaders of the revolution don't consider the effort entirely wasted if it doesn't end in a proletarian dictatorship. Every revolt against constituted governments and lawful authority is considered by those who plot and plan revolutionary efforts as a step in the right direction. If the effort falls short of success, that is bad, but not hopeless. It doesn't matter how many people are killed. They are just pawns in the game. They are expendable. It is extraordinary how few of the top-level revolutionary leaders get killed during a rebellion. It is accepted as good revolutionary technique to sacrifice the masses and preserve the members of the Illuminati, for they are to govern the new order. Even in ordinary strikes, the Reds usually stir up the trouble and then sneak away. They leave the other workers to do the actual fighting with the police or militia. The following facts are given to prove that during the revolution, everyone who is not a party member or a fellow traveler may accept no mercy of any kind. Even fellow travelers are liquidated after they have been used to advantage. Prior to July 1936, the directors of the WRM had literally flooded Madrid with agents. Moses Rosenberg arrived at Moscow's ambassador to Madrid. Atenef Avsenko arrived in Barcelona. Dimitrov arrived to personally conduct the religious persecution planned to follow the communist coup during the Civil War. Rosenberg ruled as Tsar of Madrid. Avsenko assumed command of the Catalan Red Army. Rosenberg organized the Checas in Spain and saw that they carried out their work of spying out more and more victims. Moscow's agents organized purification squads. Officially, their duty was to seek out fascists, but secretly they liquidated all those who had been previously listed as revolutionaries to the Illuminati's plan for subjugation of Spain. These lists had been compiled by communist spies who had been worked into the union of consiglieres, house and apartment janitors, the tax departments, and the postal services, and other public offices. The lists of those to be liquidated were very complete because Moscow's spies, some disguised as scissors and knife grinders, had covered every district, street by street, and house by house. All citizens were listed according to their political, labor, social, and religious standing and affiliations. When the order for the reign of terror to start was given, the communists worked with the sureness, the ferocity, and the thoroughness of starved brutes. Stalin had once stated, "It is better that 100 innocent people die than one reactionary should escape." They obeyed this order with devilish persistency. So others who live in countries not yet subjugated may understand what happens under a reign of terror. Some actual atrocities will be described. On July 17, 1936, a group of communists wearing the uniform of government troops called at the Dominican convent in Barcelona. The leader informed the Mother Superior that because mob violence was feared, she had ordered to escort the sisters to a place of safety. The sisters gathered together their few belongings and unsuspectingly accompanied the soldiers who took them to the suburbs where they murdered them all. The leader callously remarked afterwards, We needed the building. We didn't want to muss it up before we occupied it. Senor Salvans was a known anti-communist. 3 times purification squads visited his home in Barcelona. When the third visit produced no information regarding his whereabouts, the Reds murdered the whole family of 8. That vile deed was performed in accordance with paragraph 15 and 16 of the instructions already referred to. One of the most senseless acts of violence ever committed in the name of liberty, equality, and fraternity was the murder of 16 lay brothers who worked voluntarily as male nurses in the largest hospital in Barcelona. Their only claim was that they belonged to a religious order. The fact that they nursed all who were sick, regardless of class, color, or creed, made no difference to those who ordered their liquidation. E.M. Godin, who published Conflict in Spain on page 72, reported, "The slaughter of the living was accompanied by derision for the dead. During the last week of July 1936, the bodies of nuns were exhumed from their graves and propped up outside the walls of their convents. Obscene and offensive placards were attached to their bodies." My cousin, Tom Carr, was a mining engineer in Spain from 1919 to 1938. He was married to the daughter of Mr. Alloc, the American consul of Huelva. One of Caballero's 5th communists had been elected mayor of Huelva. When Moscow gave the word, he turned over the civic administration to the communists. Their first act was to torture and then murder all the priests. The nuns were stripped naked and driven from the convents into the streets to provide sport for the revolutionaries. Godin also states that he interviewed 2 English women who only escaped molestation because they were foreigners. These 2 women told Godin they had been forced to witness a mob of men and women act like fanatic dervishes. In the first instance, the Reds tortured and mocked the priest before they finally hung his dismembered body and limbs from a statue of the Blessed Virgin. In the second instance, the mob drilled a hole through the body of a young priest, and then, while he was still living, transfixed him with a crucifix. In September 1936, Pere Van Hoye, famous French author, reported Dimitriev as saying, "We are reproached with destroying the churches and convents of Spain. What does the destruction of a few convents and churches matter? We are out to create a new world." A committee which officially investigated communist atrocities in Spain in 1939 agreed that a conservative estimate placed 50,000 as the number of citizens liquidated in Barcelona as reactionaries between July 1936 and December 1937. In Venezuela, the number was set at 30,000. In Madrid, they estimated that fully 1/10 of the whole population was systematically murdered to make Spain into another totalitarian state. To illustrate what happens when the Reds took over control in Spain, I quote some other independent witnesses. Marcel M. Dutrey, the famous French author, stated, "At Castres-Urdial, the communist military commandant was an ex-municipal policeman who had been dismissed for theft. The new chief of police had previously made his living making and selling obscene postcards. The public prosecutor was the illegitimate son of a woman who had previously been a well-known streetwalker. He was nicknamed son of his mother. The Red Tribunal was presided over by a minor who was assisted by 2 assessors. All these men were sadists. They glorified in carrying out the sentences they themselves opposed on their victims. They opened the stomach of Vincent Murat. They martyred Julie Jaco publicly in the market square. They dismembered Varese, the famous Spanish racing motorist, on the grounds that he refused to betray his friend into their hands. Mr. Arthur Bryant, who wrote the preface to the fully evidenced and authenticated report on communist atrocities in Spain, remarked on several occasions, Soviet agents obtained such a control of the communication systems that only reports variable to their cause got into the majority of the world's newspapers. But on the other hand, the most outrageous lies against the Franco forces were conjured up and given to the press of the world without let or hindrance. Bryant was so disgusted with what he saw that he wrote, "No university lecturer or anonymous BBC commentator has told the just and compassionate British people the truth about the women of San Martin de Valdeiglesias. For no greater crime than that they were found to possess some religious emblem, the women in San Martin de Valdeiglesias were condemned to be violated, and to satiate every vile passion of 25 red militia men each. The fact that the fathers of some of the women had been imprisoned and were under sentence of death, and that their mothers were forced to be present to witness the degradation of their daughters, was not sufficient to dissuade the red militia men from carrying out the sentence. The horrors of the hours suffered by these women had terrible effects on some of their minds. The survivors related how, again and again, they implored their executors to kill them rather than to submit them to such dreadful dishonor. The appalling cruelty of such atrocities can be realized by the fact that many of the condemned women were married, and when they were conducted between militiamen before this pitiless tribunal, they carried children in their arms, and these children were witnesses of this culmination of the horror and the dishonor of their mothers. It is little wonder that the secret power directing the WRM said communists should not be required to carry out their plan of terrorism in the localities in which they have lived with their families, but had to be used elsewhere. Every communist will declare that these atrocities were committed by uncontrollables who were punished when they were caught. So that no person may be deceived by such lies, I will again quote Lenin, the first canonized saint of the Illuminati totalitarian creed. Lenin said on various occasions, "There are no morals in politics, there is only expediency. A scoundrel may be of use to us just because he is a scoundrel." On another occasion, he said, "Young revolutionaries should start training for war immediately, by means of practical operations such as liquidating a traitor, killing a spy, blowing up a police station, or robbing a bank to provide funds for the uprising, etc. Do not shirk from these experimental attacks. They may, of course, degrade into excuses, but that is a worry of the future." The communist Krasikov was a libertine who squandered party funds on riotous living. Lenin, when ordering his liquidation, said, "It does not matter that Comrade Krasikov has squandered party funds in a brothel, but it is scandalous that this should have disorganized the transportation of illegal literature." Communist training is designed to squeeze the last drop of human kindness out of the hearts of men and women who aspire to become high priests of the religion. And Napoleon rose to dizzy heights in the Soviet hierarchy. she became foreign minister of Romania. She proved she was loyal to Stalin when she rendered herself a widow by denouncing the father of her 3 children as a Trotskyite. Communist terrorists encouraged mere boys to become executioners of the enemies of the proletariats in order to harden them and remove from their hearts every last vestige of human sentiment and sympathy. One such youth told how he had a lot of fun with a priest. He said, nights after nights we took him out with the groups we had to kill, but always we put him last in line. We made him wait while we killed all the others, and then we took him back to Bellas Artes again. The Bellas Artes was the building of fine arts which the communists used as a prison. Each night he thought he was to die, but a quick death was too good for him. That fragile died 7 deaths before we finally finished him. Mr. Nofblaf, on page 87 of his book, Correspondence in Spain, tells of a horrible incident which confirms the contentions that the planners of the world revolutionaries select potential leaders while they are very young and then train them until they are devoid of every trace of human sentiment and pity. Noblev tells how communist youths boasted to a doctor in his presence that they had mutilated and murdered 2 young priestesses. They penetrated the disguise of these 2 religious men who, to escape detection and death, were working as coal heavers. The 2 youths told how they made the 2 priests dig their graves with their coal shovels. Then, in accordance with the communist designed reign of terror, they emasculated their 2 victims and forced the organs into their mouths. They stood by jeering while the priest died slow, lingering deaths. De Fonteries in Red Terror in Madrid, pages 19 through 20, tells how the Chekas organized by Dimitrov and Rosenberg tried to make a certain lady tell where her husband was hiding. The woman probably didn't know his whereabouts, but to make sure she didn't, the members of the Chekas made her sit and watch while they amused themselves piercing the breasts of 8 women members of her household with long hat pins. To prove a previous statement that those who designed the pattern of the Reign of Terror used criminals and lunatics to stir up the bloodlust, I report what happened in Alcala on July 20th, 1936. The Red released all the prisoners, both male and female, on condition that they would bear arms for the communist cause. They numbered 1,000 men and 200 women. They were formed into a battalion of Alcala. They excelled themselves in the victorious attack on Madrid. As a reward, they were sent to Ziguenza. After taking over the town, they murdered 200 citizens to break down the resistance of the others. This battalion of criminals occupied Ziguenza for 16 weeks. They were driven out by Franco's forces. It was found that every female from 10 to 50 had been violated. Many of them were pregnant and many diseased. Some were both. One girl, a waitress in a hotel, told how lucky she had been. She told how the criminals had murdered the bishop of Siguenza in the most horrible, barbarous, and unprintable manner. At the banquet held in the hotel that night, one of the battalion took a fancy to her and demanded that one of his comrades dress himself in the murdered bishop's vestments and marry them. The others thought this a great joke and carried out the mock ceremony. After the wedding, the militianes performed the dance en ventre, using the dining table as a stage. After the orgy ended, the man claimed the girl as his own personal property. Relating this happening, she remarked, "I was lucky, my man was an assassin, but it was better to belong to him than to be the plaything of all. I, at least, escaped disease. Marcel M. Duthey published the fact that in Ciempozuelos, over 100 religious brothers were bound to lunatics who were then furnished with knives. One can imagine the horror which followed. Moscow's army of trained propagandists told the world how Franco's troop had murdered the mayors of many small towns, but they didn't mention the fact that they had been tried by a properly constituted military court and proved to have been communist agents of Largo Caballero, who had plotted to turn Spain into a dictatorship. If further proof is needed to substantiate the statement that the secret powers behind the world revolutionary movement used communists throughout the world to further their totalitarian plans, the numerous dissertations from the Communist Party all over the world should provide that proof. Douglas Hyde, who for the preceding 5 years was news editor of the Daily Worker, Britain's leading communist newspaper, in March 1948 announced his resignation from the Communist Party. In a press release, he stated, "I believe that the new line of the Communist Party, introduced after the formation of the Common Form last year, 1947, is successful. It will bring nothing but misery to the common people." Mr. Hyde went on to explain that since the end of the World War II, he had been worrying regarding Moscow's foreign policy. He said he had finally become convinced that the party line as now determined by the Moscow clink was no longer in keeping with the ideals for which he had worked so long, and that the ultimate result would be to destroy the very freedoms and 330 destinies for which communists had been fighting for so long a time. He concluded with these words, "My growing disillusionment led me to seek some other answer to the problem of our day, and another way out of the world chaos." Right on top of Mr. Hyde's resignation in London, England, came that of Mrs. Justina Krusenstern-Peters, a staff member of Soviet publications for the preceding 12 years. She announced her resignation in Shanghai, China. She said, "The strain of writing according to orders from Moscow became more than I could bear. I am still a Soviet citizen. I am sure my feelings are shared by many of my colleagues in Russia. The only difference is that they are not able to protest against their enslavement. Most communists work to bring about an international of Soviet socialist republics. In other words, they feel that only by using revolutionary methods can they speedily destroy the stronghold of selfish capitalism and place political power in the hands of the workers. Few party members realize that they are working themselves into a state of slavery, from which there is no hope of escape." That was Chapter 15. If you have enjoyed this reading, please consider subscribing. It would be greatly appreciated. Until the next chapter, the events leading up to World War II.